多非常精彩的观念。冯博士本身呢，在之前，就我个人而言啊，我看了他的简历之后，说实话，这个非常的害怕来介绍他，因为他的经历太精彩。但因为时间有限呢，我很简短跟大家分享一下，他不仅仅跨越了几个地方的这个生活，从在印度出生到了美国，在英国，在亚洲，甚至在新加坡，都有非常丰富的这个经历。那同时呢，他也曾任 SAIC， 这是 Fortune 500大里面的 Vice President 的位置啊。那除此之外，他是 NSF， 就是 National Science Foundation， 还有美国的这个 American Physical Society 也都是非常重要的成员。好 ，Without further ado， 我们非常感谢他特别从新竹赶上来跟我们分享今天下午精彩的这个 keynote， 让我们用最热烈的掌声，除去你刚刚吃饱的这个胀的感觉，用最热情的感觉来欢迎冯教授，谢谢。
大家好。大家好。好。我今天的工作是 keeping them awake。OK， 我今天是用英文讲 ，OK， I'm going to use the English language to speak, so this guy is going to feel good. The title is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, as an academic and also as a someone working in industry. I was always concerned about the business and academic relationship, and since coming to Taiwan, I found that this relationship is even more acute than I had realized. This is a story that everybody knows, stay hungry and stay foolish. I hope that you will do the same. Jargons in universities today, in the university corridor, this is the university corridor of Stanford University, is the following. We always talk about academic industrial collaborations in Taiwan, is called 产学合作。Tech transfer, 技术转移 intellectual properties IP, 知识产权 return of investment ROI, and initial public offerings, IPO, venture capital, venture VC. When I was in graduate school, VC is also called Vietcong. So, how did we reach this landscape? How should we prepare the future? A famous American author named Pearl S. Buck, Cai Zhenzu, she said that if you want to understand today, you have to search yesterday, which means that you really have to pay some attention to history. The transition, of course, went from centers of knowledge pursuit and to become intellectual and economic engines nowadays for universities, especially for research universities or for academia sinica. So how did that transformation happen? Well, let's go back a little in history and look at Harvard University in the 18th century. There are two famous presidents of Harvard University, John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams. One is the second president and one is the sixth president. And if you go to the Harvard website, you will get the following statement. During the early years, the college offered the classic academic courses based on the English university model and consistent with the prevailing puritanical philosophy of the first colonists. So although many of its early graduates became ministers in Puritan congregations throughout the New England. In other words, nearly for a long time, Harvard University is simply, their job is to produce academically sound people to become ministers. And yet, nearly a century before the two Adams, in England, there was this gentleman named Sir Isaac Newton. And we all know that Isaac Newton wrote this very, very important article called, a paper called Principia, which nowadays, if you have gone through engineering process or have taken Physics 101, it's called classical mechanics. So Principia contains one of the most important body of human knowledge. It literally lifted humanity into a scientific methodological era, which is still operating today. Even as far back as the 1600s during the Newtonian era, the scientific sociology wasn't that different from today. When the Renaissance came around, 文艺复兴, all of a sudden, these great men, every single one, made fundamental transformation to human mindset. But the great intellectual revolution that was in full rage in Europe did not affect North America significantly until very, very much later. It actually came in the 19th century, almost a century and a half later. If you go to Yale University, you would find the place where Willard Gibbs, one of the important person who developed thermodynamics, was buried. And if you look at the people who actually had created thermodynamics, 热力学, you'll find that there are all kinds of different people. There are the Echo Polytechnic School, the Glasgow School, the Berlin School, the Edinburgh School, Dresden School, and so on. Except for Gibbs, it becomes a Gibbsian school because there is nobody here. It's not a school. It's a single person. And if you look at Europe in the 19th century, the mathematicians of Europe, they're just numbers and all the great names. They're all from Europe. And that continues, the list. So in the 19th century, on the other hand, the age of academic and industrial awakening is beginning to show up. The most important person in the 19th century in terms of scientific development, of course, is Maxwell, who literally wrote down 4 simple equations and described all electromagnetic radiations. But isn't that just the science that is great during the 19th century? Music, art, and so on were also great. That's why I put Maxwell and Chopin together. In fact, I always put these two together, because I believe that Maxwell equations are as important as the Chopin Nocturne. Maxwell equations gave a complete understanding of electromagnetic radiation. It is really interesting that while the European universities were becoming global in the 19th century, and the European intellectual epicenters in the 19th century, the conditions for the United States were only beginning to make transformation, and that would prepare them to interact with industries where the condition was right. I give you a story of 3 men that I'm sure you all know: Ford, Edison, and Bell. Henry Ford, sponsor of the development of essentially the line to neck of mass transportation. Henry Ford was self-taught, never had any higher education. I'm not so sure that's such a good thing for universities today to learn that you don't need education. Thomas Edison, just like Ford, did not have formal education. And created, of course, Con Edison. There's a very interesting story that I learned from Ross Perot a long time ago in Dallas. He told me that Ford and Edison were good friends. And so when Ford created this line of production, his job is to have the cars fixed and the people moved. And he was very proud of that. So he wanted his good friend Edison to come and see this. When Edison saw it and said, "Gee, have you thought about moving the cars?" That, of course, tells you the whole change. Meaning the story is as amusing as it is profound. It is profound because it tells us that in any human endeavor, there are always ways to do it more efficiently, more out of the box, more in the breakthrough mode. It was self-evidently true in the 19th century as it is today. Graham Bell. If there is no Maxwell equations, there would be no Bell. But what is not known, I don't know how many people here would know, he was actually a professor at Boston University. But Boston University never mentioned him today. And there is no obvious mention of the recognition of Bell or any claim of telephone IPs. Imagine if Boston University were a Stanford University today, or MIT, or even a National Tsinghua University, or National Tsinghua University, it would claim telephone's IP. then of course no funding of any form will ever be needed for the next century, or maybe even the millennium. In many years, in many ways, all three industrial giants of the 19th century did not have academic-industrial relations either directly or indirectly on their industry. Why? Well, because US universities were immature. And there were only a few of them. So allow me to give you an example supporting this assumption. The quality of Harvard University. Our most respected higher education leaders in the United States today, President Dick Levin of Yale, about a great president of Harvard University, which is Charles Eliot, which was between 1869 and 1909 when he was the president. He said, this is Yale president said, Charles Eliot was almost certainly the most influential university president of the time. I believe that it is fair to say that cumulatively, the changes he brought to Harvard had significantly and as enduring an impact on higher education in the United States in the accomplishments of any university president before or since. He became a national figure during the second half of his tenure as the spokesman of liberal individualism and on advocate of school reform. Translate into modern jargon, Harvard is no Harvard until Eliot went through it. Harvard ain't that great before Eliot. If Harvard were not that great, imagine what other universities were like. Example 2, creation of the land-grant universities in the United States. The proliferation of the so-called land-grant university. This came from a senator who actually proposed what is called the Morrill Act. This is the Morrill Act. Essentially, it says, university education needs to align with the industries of the day, and the day was agriculture and mechanical arts. These universities of today that we think of, all these great universities today, were all land-granted. Imagine the United States today without such universities, without the Berkeleys, without the Illinois, without the Arizonas, and so on. What sort of economic it would be. So while today it would be inconceivable for the US economy and the intellectual well-being to be without these great universities, in the second half of the 19th century, they were all fledgling universities, brand new universities, whose future quality were not guaranteed to be outstanding. 3 metamorphoses took place in the 20th century. First, World War I and World War II. Brain drain from Europe into United States. There's a great book that I suggest you to read. It's called Hitler's Gift. Hitler's gift to the United States is to literally lift the best of the best of the best in Europe and dump it in a very short time in North America. Second, Vannevar Bush, who was a very important person, worked with Harry Truman and created what is called the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation is the first federal government agency which allowed university faculties to engage in curiosity-driven research. Third, 2 senators, Birch Bayh and Senator Bob Dole, created the Bob Dole Act, the Bayh-Dole Act. This is when the federal government says university owns IP. University as an institution owning IP, not faculties owning IP. And this is something that Taiwan needs to learn very, very quickly. Unfortunately, many Taiwan faculty think that they own the IP. Instead of government owning the IPs, the Act permits a university, small business, or non-profit organization to retain the intellectual property ownership. This fundamentally changed the university-industry relationship. Universities now can take their IPs and negotiate various relationships with industries, such as license, co-ownership, and so on. So does this work? Well, again, let me return to what Yale president said. Historically, most U.S. universities did not actively seek to participate in this translation of discoveries into new product processes and services. An example is MIT. MIT does very well. So illustrations that the impact of the university can have on its local economy, and MIT in fact created more than 1,000 of such companies. So why aren't there more MITs? Indeed, what is the mission of the 21st century research universities? Universities have to be economic and intellectual engines. And my answer is that it can only be if we stimulate economic and intellectual development synergistically. A good friend of mine who is a very successful entrepreneur, as some of you are or will be, a business is there to make money, ethically of course, or small startups. The 5 commandments of entrepreneurship. Number 1, you got to have a good idea. 2, a burning desire to do business. 3, a way to obtain business finance. 4, a process to turn a prototype or an integrated prototype into a product. Last, sell it. Normal university operation is inside out. A good idea, this is not short supply in the university. It says, Kenichi Omi saying, we are smarter than we. Unfortunately, many IPs are integrated into a product. University does not know how to do that. A burning desire to do business. On the average, this is a little less abundant inside the university. A process to obtain business finance. This is the picture of a venture capitalist or a vulture capitalist. Now, this is even more difficult. A process to turn a prototype or an integrated prototypes into product is a euphemism for manufacturing. Impossible. Sell the product. No university knows how to do that. This is called the valley of death. We cannot jump through it. So, if we cannot do inside out, let's try outside in. And that's where you guys would come in. A good idea. This is certainly not in short supply from the outsiders. Without good ideas, there is no business for you. A burning desire to do business, I guess, it's got to be there. A process to obtain business finance. Outsiders to survive, at least initially, they better know how to obtain business finance, or else they don't have a business. A process to turn a prototype or integrated prototypes into products. This is a euphemism for manufacturing. They also better know how to do that, or they have no business. A process to sell products successfully. This is also a euphemism for marketing. Universities cannot do that. You better know how to do that, or you have no business. So putting inside out and outside in on the same platform as a university platform, I think this is the future of university-industry relationship. Such a platform which involves complicated issues as who owns IPs and how much, how to system integrate prototypes together, and so on and so forth, must be constructed, clearly defined, and delineated. You got to have intrinsic self-confidence in Asia today. And I like to jump into a new area. This is the rise of East Asia. And you all know that in the southern part of Asia, there are 10 countries forming the so-called ASEAN. ASEAN are undergoing tremendous transformation. Politically, they are showing stability. Even the worst of the 10, Burma or Myanmar, is now undergoing transformation. The Prime Ministers of Singapore, Lim, and the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib, is now talking about the new Iskandar collaboration with the land just north of Singapore, twice as large as Singapore, if not bigger, for food development. The President of Indonesia talked about, through a CNN interview, that we have plans to prioritize infrastructure development. ACE ASEAN and China is forming a free trade system called the 10+1. Now we're talking about 10+3. In 2020, Beijing to Singapore will be linked by high-speed rail through Laos, Thailand, Malaysia. The shortest distance between Indonesia and Malaysia is Malacca, which is only 38 kilometers, and so which is shorter than the UK, France, and they're talking about building the next tunnel between Malaysia and Indonesia. So combining all these two projects together with political stability, I'm imagining that in 10-15 years, one can actually take a fast train from Beijing to Jakarta. After the completion of these monumental infrastructures construction, it is inconceivable that accompanying economic, cultural, and even political improvements will not follow. Let me also give a little quick synopsis of the rise of India. The first Nobel Prize winner of Asia is actually an Indian, is Tagore, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. And the statement about him is expressed in his own English words, a part of the literature of the West. And the last one of the 20th century is another Asian, Gao Xingjian, who won it because they opened up new paths for Chinese novel and drama. The language difference between Tagore's Nobel Prize to Gao Xingjian's Nobel Prize is a transformation of colonialism to Asia respect. So a century later, India went from colonial era to the global power. The first scientist who won the Nobel Prize in physics is not a Chinese, is not a Japanese, but an Indian called Raman. I'd like to summarize what the Indians are now talking about Asia through this great article written by an Indian philosopher. His name is Manoj Das. And this is an absolutely mesmerizing article, and I urge you to read this because you've got to understand the power of India that is rising. He says, we in India have debated as much as other Asian countries have about issues like the desirability of Western influence on our culture, its inevitability or otherwise, and the relationship between tradition and modernity. Like the May 4th movement, which championed Western values and ideals in the 1920s. We, meaning India too, had voices against our traditions, and they were given a reasonable hearing. An exchange and experience of this kind would no doubt be highly educative. For quite some time, Indian literature for the common English meant Rudyard Kipling and the like wrote. For long, India's window as well as that of the West of Chinese life has been Pearl S. Buck, which I mentioned earlier. But when I read Lu Xun, the number of short stories, and the true story of A.Q. Zhenduan, I realized that despite the realism of the works of Pearl S. Buck and other gifted writers, Lu Xun's work had an authenticity that could be expected only of a native of China. I do not propose to display my meager knowledge of Chinese literature here, but what I propose is a strong and well-planned academy of Asian literatures to take care of the great need to know one another. And who could take an effective step in that direction? For me, that is that gentleman. The answer came from the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, who said, if China and India hold together, the future of Asia is secure. This holding need not, well, I can skip that. That means just when all the students of today in universities are ready to embark on their careers, some of you are embarking on your careers too, Asia Pacific will be starkly different, hopefully for the better, than what it is today. Problems such as large percentage of human population that does not have the three fundamental grids of modern living: electric, water, and sewage, or lack of water, or lack of energy, or global warming, poverty and ignorance, disease, human hatred. The tools to need to solve these globally challenging problems are not just dependent on science and technology, but also in understanding human behaviors, public policies, and political courage. And when you're doing business, you too will have to fold this into your consideration. To do so, they need to have a mindset of inherent self-confidence. Summary. The changing from West to the United States to Asia, with Asia becoming one of the, if not the most economically robust region in the world. Can we take the lead in this critical moment in the 21st century? Can Asia develop far-reaching public policies such as those by Morrell in the 19th century for the land-grant universities, and Truman Bush and the Bayh-Dole in the 20th century to grow the academic-industrial relationship for the cultural and economic enrichment of the region in the 21st century? That is our top challenge. I hope I have convinced you that even though one sees significant transformation in academia and industrial relationships in the 20th and the 21st century, where the situation went from non-existent to relatively sophisticated interaction, the situation is far from optimal. For one thing, it is clear that more and more industries, because of the nature of the business, are getting out of research and do only a minimum amount of development. With the world facing the possibility of economic downturn and or meltdown, more and more corporations are going to be very stingy in holding on closely their liquidity to protect themselves from takeovers, friendly or otherwise. Obviously, within the priority of sacrifices corporations need to make, R&D will surely be nearly at the top, if not the top. Yet without R&D, corporations may not be able to follow and or lead in the fast-changing world. I was invited to give a summary in the 2009 Asia Development Bank Conference on the Global Economic Crisis Industrial Reconstruction. And I said the following. Throughout the 20th century, Asia was psychologically coupled to the West, and understandably so. With superior economic and intellectual strengths, it is quite natural that Asia viewed the West as the standard of excellence. However, after such a period as that, with the West so palpably exposing the social and economic weaknesses, this may be the first time in the modern global economy that Asia can psychologically decouple from the West. This is not to suggest that Asia should be decoupled economically and intellectually from the West. Rather, I'm talking about a psychological decoupling to undo a sense of reliance on the West, without which it is unlikely that Asia will develop a deep sense of inherent self-confidence, and without which the 21st century is surely not to be the Asian century. So the key here is psychological decoupling, or心理上与西方脱钩. Thank you.
非常谢谢冯校长给我们如此有力而且振奋心理的一段话，我感觉好像听到哲学大师，而不是只是跟我们分享他的看法跟经验，而是会感动的。借这个时间，有没有任何的问题？
Thanks, Professor Peng. Was quite a speech. So I guess in some of your slides, right, you mentioned about intellectual property. So I was wondering, so this is a big question, right? So because you mentioned about, some of the IP, right? It's currently holding by individual rather than university or business, right? And there's a big influence on that. So should the current system, right, of the IP go into more I guess a group base for the benefit of humanity, or should it be more like for individual? So that second question is, if you want to start a business, do you have any suggestion in terms of how they should protect their IP?
Well, if you're at a university, your IP is automatically provided and protected within the university. So that's not an issue. If you're a creator outside, you're innovator from the outside, and you have your own IP, then you have to go through this whole process of ensuring that your IP is registered and so on. And you have to protect it by paying the maintenance fees and so on and so forth. My issue about IPs within university is that I think universities need to have a completely new way of looking at university innovations. I am quite certain that 99.9% of the university innovations that was written in becoming a patent are on the shelf. They're worthless. So, therefore, the problem with the universities is when Bayh-Dole Act started, and now Bayh-Dole Act is actually moving into Japan, and it's moving into Korea, and to a certain extent it's also moving into Taiwan. The Bayh-Dole Act is saying that the university owns the IP. And the problem with university is that the university really does not know what to do with it. So the university created this organization in every university for tech transfer office. And the tech transfer office look at the world and say, aha, I saw the IPs of University of Wisconsin selling vitamin B12 and made a bundle of money. And I saw University of Florida have an IP for the Gatorade and made a bundle of money. So I think that all the IPs that we have within the university, one of them would make us a bundle of money. So they held on to all the IPs. They would not let the individuals hang on to the IPs. And so the individual could not really exercise his ability to turn it into something useful. Secondly, the university does not know how to speak the language of the people outside the university. We need to learn how to speak the language of the venture capitalists, the language of the angels, the language of the investment bankers, and I assume some of them are here. But universities do not have that ability to do so. That is an area where the university clearly needs to change. Furthermore, for universities to look at large companies, we should not look at the large companies as funding agencies. Taijidian or Taiwan Semiconductor didn't exist because they are philanthropists. They are there to make money. When I was with SAIC, it was a company of $6 billion annual revenue company. When I first went, I went from a university to become the vice president. I didn't understand how this thing worked. And I thought, wow, now we have $6 billion to work with. And very quickly I realized that the money that's within the company that's down to the amount of money that you can actually spend on free activities is a very, very small amount. So companies have a real need. They're there to make money for their people. So there is this gap of understanding between academia and the industry. So to do that, you really have to start working very closely. And I hope, for example, meetings like this will be attended not just by industrialists. It must be attended by university people. And I don't know how many of you are come from university. I suspect none. If so, very few. And that is the problem. That we don't speak the language of each other. We don't understand each other. And so the creation of a landscape of entrepreneurship through university and industrial relationship is still not there. And until it's there, and there are a few success stories, by the way, in the United States. And those we can really learn. One is San Diego. The relationship with UCSD and the biotech company of Southern California is something that we can learn. For example, I know that biotech, there are about 300 biotech companies surrounding UCSD. So when I went to talk to the person who runs these biotech consortiums, and I said, how many new companies are created every year? He said, oh, anywhere between 20 to 50. And I said, wow, wouldn't you the number just keep on growing? He said, no, it's always around 300. Because for every 300 grow, out of 50 new ones, there will be 51 that shut down. So they keep on making sure that their companies, business plans and so on gets better and better. The interaction between the universities and so on gets better and better. And that's how San Diego became the biotech centers of the world. And those are the things we need to learn here in Taiwan. Even in Hsinchu, I don't quite see that yet. So I'm not sure I've given you the answer, but I think that these are the problems we have to work on.
还有其他问题吗？后面。
Thank you for your wonderful talk, Professor.
Where are you? Can you stand up? I can't see you. Oh, okay, go ahead.
I'm a PhD student in academia. I'm curious, in good university in U.S. like MIT or Stanford, they have great funding to invest their lab and buy people from globally. I'm curious whether you think it's a good model for Asian countries, like in Taiwan. We don't have much money for that. So do you have some good business model for our university or for our research? Thank you.
Well, you asked a very fundamental question about how higher education or research universities should be operated within Taiwan, and whether we should take the U.S. model as the one. The few universities that you mentioned are all private universities. Those are private universities, so they are absolutely free from government control. I think it's even more important than just putting money into the university. What is most important in Taiwan is the lack of autonomy of institutions or public universities. The lack of autonomy, for example, Taiwan universities, and certainly all the national universities, have no autonomy. We are all running under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Education. And I think until that changes, until that part is transformed, where people can actually make real decisions and be responsible for making real decisions, Taiwan, as good as it is today, and it is very good, by the way, I'm always saying that Taiwan's education system is a miracle because some of the organization structure is somewhat dysfunctional. And yet it has reached as good as it is. And it is very good. But to go to the next level, it will have to have autonomy. Without that, I don't think it will happen.
OK， 碍于时间的关系，非常谢谢冯校长。那如果有疑问的话，待会如果时间够的话，再跟冯老师请教。好，谢谢。